All right, big news this Monday morning. The Pittsburgh Steelers made another trade. Mike, I followed the Steelers most of my life. For a long time, the Steelers were this conservative, let's don't do much,
Yeah.
let's, build up our guys from within. And
Yeah.
now the Steelers are stealing all the headlines. Let me look at the exact details of this trade, because this just broke right before we got on. The Steelers traded Minkah Fitzpatrick and a pick swap with the Miami Dolphins. They got back Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith from the Miami Dolphins. Ramsey, well thought of cornerback, getting a little bit older. Last year wasn't quite as great as previous years, but Ramsey can still play. He's the third highest paid cornerback in the NFL. And then Jonnu Smith, I'm not sure if a lot of people know about him, but last year he set a franchise record for receptions as a tight end. 88 catches, 884 yards for the Dolphins last year. Big trade. Steelers kind of needed some more cornerback help. They got Darius Slay as a free agent from the Eagles Super Bowl team last year. Highly thought of Joey Porter Jr. They've got three good cornerbacks, and you need that now in the NFL with the passing. They also were looking for another option for Aaron Rodgers. So it seemed like they picked up a lot of this stuff. Minkah Fitzpatrick, that hurts. Minkah was a good safety for the Steelers. I think maybe part of the question was Minkah was making a lot of money, and maybe he wasn't producing like a $20+ million paid safety he is. But, man, a lot to put my hands around. They have a big trade this morning for the Steelers.
Sure was. And you're looking at that tight end. They'll have two really good tight ends now with the Steelers. And really the AFC North, they love to throw the tight ends. Look at the Browns, look at the Ravens, look at the Steelers. They all have those big-time tight ends that they can check down to. So I think that's a good trade for the Steelers, even though, I thought Fitzpatrick was a really good player on the defensive end. So a little surprised by that, but I think it helps them fill some needs.
Well, and if you think about it, too, it's not even a knock on Fitzpatrick as much. You got two really good guys for Minkah Fitzpatrick. So it's almost a thought of what do you have to trade to get somebody. Now, I know Jonnu Smith was a little bit concerned with his contract in Miami. So was Jalen Ramsey. They're getting paid high money, too. And I know when Jalen Ramsey trade rumors started going on, some people were thinking, well, you wouldn't have to trade as much because his contract's so high.
Yeah.
And I think that's why maybe it became a 2-for-1 trade where, the Steelers picked up two players for one and Minkah Fitzpatrick. You look at tight ends, Arthur Smith, their coordinator, he's more of a two tight end guy.
That's right.
If you also look at it too, some of the previous Steelers quarterbacks, even like guys like Russell Wilson from last year and Justin Fields, they weren't as good with throwing to the tight end. You got Aaron Rodgers now. Aaron Rodgers really likes throwing the tight end. That's been important to him throughout his career. So you got two good tight ends, Freiermuth and Jonnu Smith. I still kind of wonder about that wide receiver too. But, I mean, you've got three options for Rodgers. I know the Steelers like Calvin Austin, one of their younger receivers. Is he good enough to be number 2 in this system? I'm still not sure. They also like Roman Wilson. He was hurt most last year. He didn't play as much. He's that receiver they got from Michigan. Boy, I don't know. And, the other thought was there's a lot of talk saying, hey, would the Steelers trade for a bigger name wide receiver too? I'm not sure how much money they have left in their cap now. When you trade for Ramsey and Jonnu Smith. So
I wouldn't rule anything out with this new front office of Steelers. They will wheel the deal. And they've shown that the last couple of years.
Well, and you could also say too, you've got, draft pick. You've got draft picks you can move around. There was some thought saying, look, the Steelers, you've got Aaron Rodgers. He's going to play for more than a year or two. The Steelers are pretty much primed to go for a quarterback in a really good NFL draft for quarterbacks next year. They've got a lot of mid-round picks that they were able to get. But, man, if you trade up for quarterback, you're not trading mid-round picks. You got to trade multiple first-round picks. So,
right. Yep.
I don't know. Maybe, you've got a couple middle-round picks next year. Maybe you get a decent veteran receiver for one or two of those. I don't know. It's one of those things that it's a lot to digest and trying to figure out what does this mean for the Steelers moving forward. I mean, I think it's a productive move. I mean,
I do too.
I'm sad to see Minkah go, but you've got two Pro Bowl type players coming back, so I don't think you can complain about seeing Minkah go.
Right.
Interesting. That's where Minkah came from, if you remember. He was drafted by the Dolphins. He had a tough time down there. At the time, when he was drafted in the league, he played corner, he played safety. The Dolphins were trying to play him all around. I think he wanted a little bit more stability. So that's why he kind of asked for the trade and he welcomed it. Miami's a decent team now. Miami really wasn't that great when they traded him. So it'll be interesting to see what Miami does with him when he goes back. I mean, he'll definitely be the standout guy in their defense. Without question. Yep. So
at the end of the day, I think it probably helps both teams. But I from the Steelers standpoint, I like it.
Yeah, Miami had some salary cap issues, and
and I think that was this big time.
Yeah, Smith was asked for a contract. I think Miami really wasn't thrilled with what they were getting for Ramsey. I mean, he had 2 picks last year. Yeah. I know they traded a lot for him, and they were paying him a lot of money when he came up from the Rams. So, maybe it's a thought of, guys that need a fresh scenery. I mean, I think Minkah was getting along fine in Pittsburgh, but, maybe people were saying, hey, you're not playing up to your abilities to Minkah and Jalen, and say, hey, maybe a fresh scenery would be good for you and for us,
Yep.
So
it will be interesting, to say the least.
You look at this. I mean, look at the Steelers offseason. Aaron Rodgers, you traded for DK Metcalf, you traded George Pickens, and Darius Slay. He's another big name. He was a 6-time Pro Bowler. He was All Pro too from the Eagles, and he was their starting quarterback on a Super Bowl team last year. So I don't know. Miami's interesting. I see here in the article. He's the 4th Dolphins captain from last year to exit the squad.
That's amazing.
So the Dolphins making a lot of moves. Yeah. One of the other things for the Dolphins is Tyreek Hill. He's another guy. He didn't play as well last year, and it was interesting to see, will he stay with the team? Yeah. And I don't know. Hard to say after a trade like today. So
Yep. Well, I would. When you think about it, we're not too far off from training camp here. So I would think you want to get the main guys on board that you're going to go to war with this fall. So I would think, these teams are pretty much done making their big deals. You might make a few more early in training camp, but I would think most of those rosters are pretty well set at this point, or pretty close to it.
They were joking about this on ESPN radio. Like the Bulls came back for one last year, and they called it Last Dance. They had a documentary about that. I wouldn't compare the Steelers to the Bulls, but you kind of wonder what this means. I mean, Aaron Rodgers proved in an interview the other day, hey, it looks like this could be my last year. I think unless something amazing happens, he rediscovers the fountain of youth, this is probably his last year. But you got a lot of other older guys. Is this like a last dance? Is Mike Tomlin like, hey, maybe I want to retire. Let's try to go out and go for a title. You never know.
I think that it's kind of an all-out mentality for this year, Chris. And then, like you said, we'll see what goes after that. But they've definitely improved that roster.
Well, and then the thought would be, and like I said before, the Steelers aren't going to tell Mike Tomlin to leave. But Mike Tomlin's looking to say, I go back to the Bill Cowher example. Cowher was a coach for a long time. He's happy being a broadcaster. It's not like he can't coach and nobody wants him. Man, if Tomlin's got another aspect of life he wants to embrace right now, could this be his last year? And then, you've got a lot of older guys that might retire or do whatever else the case might be. And then you rebuild with a young coach that likes coaching quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And you go after your quarterback next year. I can see that potentially happening. Not that the Steelers would get rid of Tomlin, but this might be Tomlin's last hurrah, and he wants to go out and stop. You never know.
Well, I know it's like you mentioned before, Chris. You look at there's probably 2 or 3 elite teams. And if you want to compete with those elite teams in the AFC, the Chiefs and the Ravens and teams like that, and the Bills, you can't just stay status quo. That doesn't work. The status quo doesn't work. It hasn't worked. You can be a playoff team, but if you want to advance in the playoffs, you got to shake it up. And I think that's what they've done in the offseason.
Yeah. And, looking at it from Cleveland aspect for a second, how does Cleveland react to this? I know they're making good steps. I think they had a positive draft, which is good compared to other years.
They did have a good draft. Yep.
Yeah, but man,
they're a year or two away. And again, I think they need. I remember, I believe it was John Dorsey when he was with the Browns said you need 3 solid drafts in a row to build an NFL team the right way. Well, in my mind, they've had 1 now, so they need to do well again next year in the draft, do well in free agency. And then maybe because the AFC North, man, that's tough sledding. And you have traditional powers that do well every year. You gotta really be right on things as far as trades and draft picks and things like that. So the Browns are the one team they've got some catching up to do. They really do. I mean, that's just being flat. And I'm saying that as a Browns fan. It's just being honest about the situation. And their schedule this year, oh my goodness! And we talked about this before. They're 5 of their first 6 games. They're going to be underdogs, and maybe underdogs in all of them. I think they might be favored in one of those first 6, but and then that puts you behind the 8 ball right away. And if that's the case, do you then say, hey, let's take a look at one of these young guys at quarterback? There's a lot of things to be determined for the Browns this year.
Well, and you got to look at this as a growing year. And again, who knows with the Steelers? I still think AFC is tough enough that even with the move the Steelers make, I think you're probably still looking at the Steelers maybe as the 4th best team in the AFC. They have an outside chance of getting past the upper teams. But I still think going into the year, the Bills, the Chiefs, and the Ravens come in with at least a better roster. Now, the Steelers are trying to go off. I'll admit that, but it's going to be hard. But man, looking at the Browns, I mean, the Ravens are the Ravens. I still have questions about the Ravens moving forward in the playoffs, but they're still a 10-plus team in the regular season for sure.
Right. Exactly.
The Bengals. Now, the big question about the Bengals is the defense. Their offense looks amazing. They haven't signed their first-round draft pick. He's a linebacker, and Trey Henderson. That's still a contract extension. So. They're trying to figure out if he's going to get resigned or not. So the Bengals could score 50 points a game and give up 60 a game. You never know. Yeah. And the Steelers, again, I think the jury's out in the Steelers, but they're definitely trending upward with moves like they made today.
I would agree with that. And I do think the Bengals will be better this year, but are they better enough on defense? Have they improved enough on defense? I think I saw a stat, and you probably saw this last year, where Joe Burrow is the first quarterback to pass for just X number of yards, a ton of yards, and not make the playoffs. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, he had a great year coming off the injury from the year before, and but you got to have that good defense too.
Well, Josh Allen won the MVP, and him and Lamar Jackson both had good years. But there was some legitimate talk saying, man, if the Bengals somehow made it to the playoffs, you can make a case for Joe Burrow being the MVP.
That's
and again, Burrow had a great year. Nothing against Burrow. I think people were just like, well, you can't give the MVP to the guy that didn't make the playoffs. But again, it wasn't on Burrow. Just like where the Bengals would have been if Burrow didn't have a good year, the Bengals didn't have a good quarterback. It was
right.
Yeah. So to close up, as a Steelers guy, I'm still looking at it. I think if the Steelers can get to the second round of playoffs, it's a good year. Yeah. They got over the hump. And again, you never know. You're going into it as the 4th best team in the AFC, in my opinion. But again, you have a chance of getting out. Just because you're the 4th best team at the start of the year doesn't mean you can't set a team within the playoffs. You never know. So,
and I think a lot of that goes, how we talked about this, how you're playing at the end of the year. The Steelers last year weren't playing real well toward the end of the regular season. I think that carried over a little bit. You know, if you have maybe 4 losses, but you have a lot of them early and you're playing well late, hey, that team I think has a good shot in the playoffs. You're on a roll. You got momentum. You're, the teams that are reasonably healthy toward the end too, which is difficult to do in the NFL.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm chuckling. My Steelers podcast, I have a chat with them, and they both work during the day, so they're just getting wind of the trade, and they're very surprised. So I'm sure whenever we meet this week, we'll have some interesting discussions too. All right, so let us know what you think. Or you think the Steelers made the better move? The Dolphins made the better move? What does this mean for the AFC North and the AFC as a whole? And give us a like and subscribe. Have a great day.